Federal member.
The program was launched at Dudley Primary School today by the Minister for Transport, Peter Morris. It involves a number of exercises for children, pointing out the right way to use the road system, as well as a guide for teachers, suggesting ways to get this important message across. The parents are being asked to take part too, by setting a good example for the children and making sure they do the right thing. Mr Morris says the $350,000 program, which will be distributed to children all over the country, is the first detailed attempt to stop the road carnage amongst primary school children.
There have been various types of programs directed at it, but nothing of this nature. And what we're trying to do here is to focus particularly on the under 11 years of age group. And if we can build into the system the knowledge of how to use our roads and road safety system safely, of ensuring, for instance, that if you ride a bike, wear a helmet. If your children are travelling in a car, make sure there's a child restraint fitted within the car, if the children are very young, but most of all, make sure the seatbelts are used. So those kind of things, and if people understand the magnitude of the problem, I think we can get them all together.
Hundreds of people gathered under a full moon and a perfect dawn to pay their tributes. Former diggers marching along King Street heralded the start of this morning's commemoration. The years may have taken toll on their numbers, but not their pride, each one carrying a memory of a fallen comrade. The Dean of Newcastle, the Very Reverend Graham Lawrence, led the service in prayer. The address was given by Bob Tyler, the President of Legacy in the region, while State Member for Newcastle Arthur Wade delivered the eulogy. In Anzac Day tradition, wreaths and tributes were placed on the memorial by politicians and representatives of community groups and the local RSL sub-branches. Each tribute to the memory of our war dead. Newcastle's Anzac Day march started from Pacific Park and proceeded through the mall along Hunter Street to Civic Park. It was led by David Dahl of Belmont. He and his horse Mirth were dressed in original light horse uniforms.
Oh, right. Well, the reverse goose and stirrups, it's an old cavalry tradition, and I think it stands for those that didn't make it back.
And what about the other gear? It's all original light horse, isn't it?
Oh, it's all authentic. The sword on the back was an officer's ceremonial sword. The gentleman that did own that sword was killed in action in Belgium. The medal with the sword is one of the medals which was presented to him.
I believe he was a local fellow too.
What I've gathered, he came originally from Singleton.
The march proceeded through the mall and along Hunter Street to Civic Park. Two original members of the AIF from World War I were at the head. Diggers unable to march were driven to the commemorative service in taxis. Record crowds lined the street to cheer units from both World Wars, Korean and Vietnam Wars. Allied units, including units from France and Poland, were also represented, along with a number of women's services. At Civic Park, the ex-servicemen and women, as well as a huge crowd, paid further tribute to fallen comrades.
We've got about 150 members in Newcastle, and over Australia-wide there'd probably be 2,000-3,000 or more flyers. There's a hell of a lot of birds involved in it. The average flyer probably would have 100 birds at least.
How many do you, say, lose during a season for one reason or another?
It varies depending on the weather conditions, of course. The hawks, they play a major part in us losing the birds. The weather conditions vary, and that has a lot to do with it. Drought conditions, things of that nature. But on the whole, I suppose we could lose about 50% of our birds.
The shooters have a bit to do with it too. The so-called marksmen.
That's for sure. Unfortunately, our racing season coincides with the duck season, and when they've got a headwind against them, they tend to get down fairly low, just above the treetops, and that's when they have a lash at them. And we've had many birds home with pellets in their stomachs.
Amazing. You ever feel like Robert Sangster? Like a racehorse owner, you actually do the same things with pigeons, don't you?
Oh yeah, for sure. We get champion pigeons the same as they get champion racehorses, and we keep them for stock. We breed off them. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. But overall, a good flying pigeon turns out to be a pretty good stock pigeon.
The Surf Classic reached the quarter-final stage today with competitors doing their best in small but clean waves of half to 1 metre. Organised by the Newcastle Board Association, the event attracted 120 surfers from the Newcastle region and the Central Coast. With $5,500 worth of prizes up for grabs, the big names were firing. Merewether's young Nicky Wood, fresh from out surfing Mark Richards in the Coke Surf Classic, continued his impressive form. Nicky top scored today and goes into tomorrow's final the heavy favourite. Luke Egan from Merewether was also in fine form but had to settle for second, followed by Darryl Tonks in third and Rob Lyons in fourth. With Nicky and Luke contesting the open class, the juniors section was wide open. Darren Brown, Matt Hoy and Darren MacArthur did best and will fight out the final tomorrow.
Most Australians pride themselves on their love of the great outdoors. But when it comes to putting up a tent so that it won't fall down, cooking a meal that really is appetising, and keeping camp equipment in tip-top condition, these Girl Guides probably have the edge on us all. 27 guides from Glendale and surrounding districts attended today's field day in preparation for a state muster in Muswellbrook this August. Their camp skills were tested by state assessors. Each guide must demonstrate her proficiency in the bush before attending the muster. The girls were helped by Senior Patrol Leader Sally Cameron, who will represent Australia at 2 guide meetings in England and Switzerland later this year.
Appearing on the Today Show this morning, 25-year-old Elizabeth Toohey, now a principal performer with the Australian Ballet Company, described the Soviet audiences on her 2-week trip performing with the renowned Bolshoi Ballet.
It was quite a mixed audience. There was a lot of people from the Australian Embassy. Being such a special performance, the Australian Embassy were allowed a lot of tickets. There was quite a lot of tourists because they're often get priority to seats at the Bolshoi because they'll always pay a little bit more. But then there are also in the higher tiers of the theatre ordinary Russians who go every time they possibly can to the ballet, so it was very mixed.
Fantastic. Behind every student of classical dance is a dedicated and committed teacher who, although she takes no place on centre stage, shares in the thrill of a prima ballerina. A former dancer herself, Tessa Maunder has been teaching for more years than she cares to remember. In fact, 4 of her students have become principals with the Australian Ballet Company, and now hundreds are scattered throughout Australia, Europe and America. She says that there are certain qualities which a prima ballerina must acquire, and Elizabeth had them all.
Well, Elizabeth was always a very good worker, very, very confident dancer with lots of vivacious personality. And I think that Elizabeth, even though she didn't realise she was really going to top in ballet, I think she was always so keen that she more or less aimed at doing her best all the time. She was a leader. She always led the other girls. Elizabeth had all these attributes, and I think this may have helped her to get where she is today.
Well, we feel there haven't been any activities for the up to 15-year-old children within this area. It's an ideal opportunity to provide some sort of entertainment for those children within that age group. That's the 8 to 15-year-olds.
And what sort of success have blue light discos had in the past?
There's been a very good success rate with the blue light discos within Newcastle, the Lake Macquarie and the whole of the New South Wales. It has created a good rapport with the children. I've noticed it recently, and I'm sure it has been brought about by the liaison with the children and the police through these blue light discos.
And obviously you'd expect success this weekend?
I certainly do. This coming Friday is our first blue light disco for the Wallsend, put on by the police and the Wallsend Apex, and we'll be having a disco every month after that.
Speaker and the man given the job of presenting the major award, the former Test cricketer Max Tangles Walker. The Team of the Year award went to the Hillsborough Juniors, who have had outstanding success since they joined the competition 7 years ago. This year they won both the minor and major premierships, and last night's award was the icing on the cake. The Player of the Year award went to Billy Walker of the Peninsula Club.
With a view over most of the city and harbour, Fort Scratchley offers a perfect vantage point for an outside radio broadcast. This morning's program was heard in Sydney, Wollongong and Canberra, with Newcastle the flavour of the day. The atmosphere provided by bush band Ironbark performing live was only dampened by the rain. From the middle of the year, ABC will broadcast a nationwide breakfast program based in Adelaide, but it's hoped that such visits to regional centres will continue. Breakfast Time program on 2NA chose Fort Scratchley as the vantage point for today's outside broadcast, with its sweeping views of the city and harbour. The show, which was heard around the state, had Newcastle as the flavour of the moment. The program included interviews about our history, our wine industry, and newly formed Hunter Orchestra. And bush band Ironbark performed live, but was rudely interrupted by the rain. Radio National suffers from poor ratings, attracting a mere 2% of the audience in Newcastle. It's hoped that this new programming policy will widen its audience appeal.
Breakfast Time is going to be a national program from the end of June, emanating from Adelaide. There's no reason why these sort of outside broadcasts can't still be mounted and put into the national program, which will be heard all around Australia, not only just locally.
The woman had been driving east over the bridge when she lost control of her Falcon and it skidded off the roadway through a fence and down a grassy verge. Luckily, it was prevented from sliding further by a star picket supporting a shrub. The driver from Windermere Park near Morisset received only minor injuries but was taken to hospital as a precaution. No other vehicle or person was involved. It was then left to salvage experts to tackle the ticklish task of getting the vehicle back up the slippery slope.
The new permanent part-time work scheme has been found unsatisfactory by the Public Service Association, which called stop work meetings around the state today. Although the PSA is in favour of new part-time jobs, it says the terms are inadequate. The board has reserved the right to decide which positions may be part-time and full-time, and will not offer the same conditions of service for each type of work.
They've reduced their rights to overtime, flexible working hours, reduced superannuation, reduced study leave.
Unless the board agrees to reopen negotiations with the association and defers the introduction of the scheme until after Industrial Commission hearings in July and August, bans will be introduced next Monday. They are likely to involve a series of one-hour stoppages. Association members will also refuse to cooperate with the introduction of new part-time jobs. This is the third stop work meeting you've called in the last 5 weeks, and yet you haven't swayed the Public Service Board from its stance. Do you think the industrial action on Monday will be effective?
I'm certain that the association membership will continue their industrial action, which in turn will, as did the teacher review scheme with the Department of Education, change the government's mind. This will also change the government's mind.
Work has recommenced on the site of the Shortland County Council's new administration block. The work halted back in November after a demarcation dispute between the BLF and the BWIU over who has the right to remove asbestos from the existing buildings. Today, a delegation of the Shortland County Council came to inspect the site.
Join Ray Deneen and Anna Manzoni for all the news tonight at 6.
The Newcastle squad had a quick training session last night, getting ready for the big game on Sunday. Newcastle qualified for the final when they beat Northern Rivers in the zone final in Tamworth. Their opponents this weekend, Western Districts, defeated last year's championship winner Riverina to qualify. Western Districts haven't won the country championship for more than 20 years. The local team, on the other hand, won it 2 years ago, and new coach Johnny King is confident his side will repeat that performance this time.
Well, we're looking at it could be a very strong, a hard game for us against the Western Division. They're a very good side. They've got a big pack of forwards with Ross Gibbs and Pat Smith, which has been he's played centre, now moved into the front row, which is a bit of a change. And with our side, with Mark Brackenshaw and Cole Mathias and Johnny Farrer, I think it'll be a survival of the fittest. The Western Division are a big pack of forwards, and so is ours. And I think the crowd or the spectators that come to see the game will see a very hard game played in the forwards, and the team with the biggest pack and the strongest pack, I think, will survive the day.
So what are the chances of Newcastle taking out the country championship, do you think?
Well, I think we've got a real good show. You know, I'm always confident in my players. They're pretty fast, they're very fast in the backs. We proved that when we went to Tamworth. We had 2 real good wins, and it's won through our forwards, and I'd say from here on in, that's where we're going to play. We'll play it in the forwards and run Western Division around and just see can they sustain the effort we tend to put on them.
Don, the Pigeon season starts, the racing season starts this weekend, and we're not talking about a few people, there's a lot more involved than we'd realise, isn't there?
Oh, for sure. We've got about 150 members in Newcastle, and over Australia-wide there'd probably be 2,000-3,000 or more flyers.
With a lot of birds involved.
Oh, my word. There's a hell of a lot of birds involved in it. The average flyer probably would have 100 birds at least.
How many do you, say, lose during a season for one reason or another?
It varies depending on the weather conditions, of course. The hawks, they play a major part in us losing the birds. The weather conditions vary, and that has a lot to do with it. Drought conditions, things of that nature. But on the whole, I suppose we could lose about 50% of our birds.
The shooters have a bit to do with it too.
The
so-called marksmen.
That's for sure. Unfortunately, our racing season coincides with the duck season, and when they've got a headwind against them, they tend to get down fairly low, just above the treetops, and that's when they have a lash at them. And we've had many birds home with pellets in their stomachs.
Amazing. Don, we won't go into detail with breeding, but they all really originate from one major breed, I suppose.
Yeah, well, there's various breeds. In the early stages, the old timers, they brought Harrisons, Barkers, Logans and various other breeds from overseas out here. And since then, the quarantine have stopped us from importing pigeons, and hopefully that they will allow us shortly. But that's what most of the breeds have stemmed from. My main breed that I've got here are Harrisons, and they fly exceptionally well for us. There are Miff Suds, they were an early breed too, and we have some members in our federation that fly really well with the Miff Sud pigeons too.
You ever feel like Robert Sangster? Like a racehorse owner, you actually do the same things with pigeons, don't you?
Oh yeah, for sure. We get champion pigeons the same as they get champion racehorses, and we keep them for stock. We breed off them. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. But overall, a good flying pigeon turns out to be a pretty good stock pigeon.
What sort of length are we talking about in races? I guess it varies enormously, but...
Oh, it does. From this year, we start off from Scone, that's our first race, and that's 80 mile to mostly to Newcastle.
As the crow flies.
And as the crow flies, yes. And our longest race is from Blackall in central Queensland, and that's 700 mile to Newcastle.
So it's a big variation, isn't it?
Oh, my word.
What are we talking about in pace through the air with these fellas?
Well, they range from, if they've got a headwind against them and it's a very strong wind, they'll range from about 900 metres per minute up to 1700, 1800 metres per minute.
They're an amazing creature, aren't they?
They are. They're fantastic. We had a race last year from Charleville that we're racing from again this year, and we released the birds at 6 o'clock in the morning on the Saturday morning, and they arrived at Newcastle at 10 minutes past 4 that afternoon.
It's amazing.
And that's really getting along.
And it's measured correctly. Surveyors' figures come into it, and the whole thing is done absolutely to the metre in guaranteed distance.
Guaranteed. We have a surveyor in Newcastle. He comes out, he surveys our loft and the distance that we travel to where we release the pigeons from, and he guarantees that mapping to a metre, and everything's above board.
And it's a ring in a clock, so the whole thing's done on the up and up, if you like.
That's it. There's no way that anybody can win a race by cheating or anything of that nature. We've got that down to a fine art. The clocks are all sealed. The birds have got a rubber ring on their foot, and when that arrives home, we put that in the clock, and that stamps the time, and the one with the fastest velocity wins the race.
Can we wish you a great racing season?
Let's hope so, Lee.